Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Thom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast. And as promised, I have my second guest ever. And this is one I'm really actually very excited about. And I will tell you how I met him, and then I'll let him tell you about himself. And today actually is his 6th anniversary of doing stand-up comedy. Young gentleman by the name of Chris Hasenauer. And I met Chris at a bar in Rochester, New York. I wasn't trying to pick him up. I was actually doing stand-up comedy, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, you have to go out and because you can tell a joke as a bartender. So obviously you can just become a stand-up comic. It's that simple." Well, it's not. And I tell you, Chris was one of the people that I really, really admired because he always was very even keeled. He was always very fair with all the comics, and he's super talented. And so I thought that he would be a great guest to have on, just to kind of talk about, the challenges associated with being somebody that's doing any level of stand-up comedy. I think that. And I'll let him speak to this a little bit more, but I think you get to a certain level of fame and it's just, the crowd's just going to kind of laugh at whatever you do. But it's a lot harder when you're at maybe the local or the regional level. I mean, in terms of trying to be original and then dealing with just all those different types of things. But we're going to let Chris talk to that. And Chris, before we begin, happy 6th anniversary.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you for that great intro. I appreciate the kind words that were in there. That's just really nice of you to say. The Tin Roof, where we first met, was a really interesting open mic. And it had a lot of great memories from it as well. To say something to what you had just said about at a certain level of fame, they'll just kind of laugh at whatever you said. There's a great documentary called Comedian by Jerry Seinfeld. I'm not sure if you ever saw it. It's I recommend it to everybody, but they at one point Jerry's going up to open mics to try out stuff, and he's not just like up at the store; he's in like regular open mics, and the audience goes nuts for a second, but then about a minute in, they'll give you about a minute, and then it's like, okay, well, let's see what you got, something funny then, So at a certain level of fame, definitely people give you the benefit of the doubt, but end of the day, you still got to be funny no matter what.
Yeah, I always think of Sam Kinison because Sam was my favorite stand-up comedian, and he really just was in his own there for a while. And then I think later on in his career, right before he passed, it was just this, I don't know, it was just this nonsensical. He'd show up on stage and just say things and just scream, and then people would be like, this is great. And, it wasn't, as opposed to a guy like Seinfeld, like you said, who really took his art very seriously.
I think there's something to be said. Those are two comedians that you can, people would be like, oh, apples and oranges, like Sam Kinison and Jerry Seinfeld. But truly, the comparison is they're still both comedians. And one of the big things about like comedy is, and these aren't everything I say, take with a grain of salt because it's all opinionated and stuff. But some people say funny things, and then some people say things funny. So if I use a quote or something like that, it's attributed to the person because I'm just speaking. I'm the amalgamation of all the information I've got to this point. But so someone like Sam Kinison, he says things funny. He was the kind of person who would say something that anybody could say, but he'd say it in an ultra aggressive way, or he'd say it in an over the top way so that it had a funny. Bobcat Goldthwait is another example. He's coming into Rochester soon, but he used to say things in a funny way because of the way his delivery. Whereas like there's cadence and punchlines to like someone like Seinfeld's delivery, but they absolutely are just saying more. It's more observational comedy. He's not necessarily saying things funny to get the laugh. He might just to boost the laugh, But that's all performance comedy, which is so much different than what we're here to talk about today, which is open mic comedy, right?
Well, we talk about all comedy. I mean, you've done both. I mean, you've competed in competitions, and 6 years to stick to anything. I mean, that shows a level of dedication. So, and I'm certain there's some highs and lows that go along with that.
Oh my goodness, yeah, mostly lows for sure. And I don't mean that to be joking. Like obviously, everything is kind of 80% kidding, but the lows in comedy are so much lower. But I guess there's something to be said about the volatility of the extremes of comedy. Maybe that's what's so appealing about it to me. I'm not sure, but yeah, over the 6 years I've been doing comedy, I've done, I would say probably, besides this last year, I would say I've been on stage 5 nights a week for the last couple of years, besides this last particular pandemic year. And I've hosted several open mics, including the one we met at, one also at the Bug Jar here in Rochester. Funk and Waffles is another spot that I used to host an open mic. And I have performed at a few different comedy clubs, one being the Comedy at the Carlson here in Rochester, both for Funniest Person in Rochester competitions, as well as I hosted a few times over there in their main room, and as well as Flappers Comedy Club in Burbank, California. I did some time in their small room, and I was in a small show, a couple small shows at both Helium Buffalo and Helium Philadelphia. So there's these different ranges of types of rooms and stuff, and you meet these people who, in these rooms, there's people who are, just like in a middle school, there's people who are coming into this room, and there's people who are about to leave this room, and both are excited to be there. And the camaraderie between comics, although it's taken a hit recently because some people are like, well, they're not the same type of comic, and I won't get into that too much. But, anybody they have that common ground, like, oh, this person's a comic, so they get it. They understand, and, what that is in an open mic sense is you're there to work on something that you don't really have to work on. You're choosing to, do that. And sometimes you're choosing to humiliate yourself. Most of the time you're choosing to humiliate yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. I'll tell you, the worst night potentially ever in my life as an adult was the night at the Bug Jar, and you weren't there. And it's funny because I always felt like I wanted to have someone in the audience that I at least knew, maybe a plant that would kind of laugh, or if nothing else, just to have a level of comfort. And there was nobody there that I knew, including you. There was a guest host that night, and I mean, I went up and delivered some jokes that before had gotten laughs. I mean, it was just dead silence. I mean, I've actually done 2 sermons in my life, or not sermons. What do you call that when you talk about somebody who's passed away? A
eulogy.
Eulogy. So I've done 2 eulogies, and I got more laughs than I did this night, and it was just gut wrenching. And you know what? Honestly, I didn't think that I would ever do it again. And it was really hard to go back. And I mean, do you ever face moments like that where it really is, it is, you say that, oh, I go up to be humiliated, but who the hell likes to get humiliated? I mean, it's got to be tough.
Well, there's a whole section of the internet that probably would disagree with you about being humiliated, liking to be humiliated. But what I'm saying is those moments are the breaker of dreams, to be honest with you. Those moments are, for some people, they absolutely cannot get back on the stage. The fear of bombing is absolutely too much. And I've definitely had moments like that. I remember my very first time on stage as a stand-up, and I should say, before I ever got on stage as a stand-up comedian, I'd already been in many bands and I'd played well over 1,000 shows with a metal band that I was in for 7, 8 years. And I had played as an single acoustic act as well. So I had been on stage a lot. I was very comfortable on stage. But when I first got up on stage to be a comedian, I listened back to that set because I have it recorded, and it's atrocious. Like for 5 minutes, I say absolutely nothing that is of worth, and because they knew it was my first time, people did polite laughs, But then my last joke, and I can hear it now as a amateur comedian, it's like I hear the pop. So I told this joke and it worked. The room laughed. They were ha ha, big pop laugh. And that was a moment for me where it was like I have to do this forever. Like I want that again forever. And then so I was really thinking, okay, well, now I got the jokes. Now I got the thing. I got it all figured out. I'm going to get on stage. I'm going to be great. And I would get on stage and, lo and behold, like that joke only works a few times in that room. You got to write new stuff. And I found that like about 3 in 10 things that I would bring to the stage would at least get a chuckle. So I started just writing stuff every morning. Every morning I would write a bunch of even sometimes non sequitur, nonsensical things. Or if I was having trouble thinking of something funny, I'd write something sad instead. And I would just bring those things up there and then try to own whether it was funny or not, and try to make the bombing a little less, reactionary for the audience and a little more like, okay, well, I can control what this audience wants me to bomb with, so I can try to find the positive part. But there were nights where I went to Syracuse for a comedy competition, and I had come off a string of like great shows. I was killing at Mike's. I was absolutely like, I was over at the club. I was just doing great. And I went out to this comedy competition in Syracuse. I'm thinking, I'm going to destroy. I'm going to walk home with $200. I didn't get a single laugh, Tom. I ate it the whole time. Like, I walked off stage thinking, I'd been doing it for 2 years probably. And I was like, this is it. I don't ever want to get on stage again. My ego's never been bruised this bad, which is, I've ate those words several times since, but that one really stuck out in my head. And on the drive home, I had a conversation with another actually local podcaster, Todd Gerslin, who had come to Syracuse with me, and we were talking about it. And that camaraderie of being with another comedian and being like, yeah, that was terrible. That really sucked. And it's like, yeah, and it's going to keep getting worse maybe, but those highs are, I hate to say it that way because it sounds like almost like an addiction, but I guess there's no other way to describe it. Comedy is an addiction, and the highs are not nearly as bad as the lows. You don't even think about the lows when you're getting the laughs, when you're killing the room. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the fact. I mean, I was in the same boat that I'd been on stage, in bands and solo acoustic and all that stuff. And but the advantage of being in a band and a musician is that you can play the same song at for 20 years for that matter. Whereas in comedy, it's like you can't do covers. I mean, you really don't see guys. I mean, unless it's maybe there's Vegas tribute acts that are recreating a comedian. So it's all got to be original. And again, you can't necessarily go to the well. I mean, it's there's so many challenges associated with it. But like you said, I mean, there's something that draws people to it. That high has got to be that incredible, that compelling.
It is. It truly is. And there's something to be said about the stages of what you need to do in comedy. So like sometimes you're writing to make sure that you have like material to rely on so you can switch it up enough. But then at a certain point, you got to learn to talk to your audience. You got to learn to listen to your audience. And one of the greatest skills of any comedian, and really professionals make it look effortless, if they interact with the audience at all, and they ask them questions, they do this and that, and they'll get an answer they want, and then they'll immediately go into a bit as if it were improv. And those are true like masterful orators, because they just being able to like conduct a room like a symphony is just incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, I had the advantage. I mean, for about a year, I was seeing you at two different places, Tin Roof and Bug Jar, and so I was really able to see you in different scenarios in terms of crowds, all comedians, more public and whatnot. And it really impressed me that one of the things I read in the book that they said to work on is that you kind of have to get the audience on your side. And I think that was the one thing that I really was amazed at, how well you were able to do it. I mean, you were able to really become the buddy of the audience, which I mean, and that's the kind of thing that I guess really, especially in an open mic night where you've got really this cast of characters that runs the full gamut. It's got to be, it's incredible. I found it very impressive.
Well, I appreciate that. There is, there is a little bit of a technique to that. One of the things that I would apply to this is an open mic host is there for the audience, because the comedians are there for themselves. They're not there for the venue. They're not there for the audience. They really don't care about the audience. They want something from them, but they don't care if they get anything, honestly. Like if the audience gets anything, they might. It's complicated, but an open mic host, sometimes I ramble, I apologize. An open mic host has the obligation to the audience, not the comedians, for the show to be enjoyable. So when I would walk on stage as a host, I used to say this little pitch where I'd say like, hey, audience, I really want you to be polite to my comedians and talk to them, and not talk during their sets and listen, because, and would often draw the parallel to music, because at a music open mic, you can use, you can play that song 100 times in your room before you go to that mic, and it'll be rehearsed. But if you tell a joke in your mirror 100 times before you go to an open mic, it's not going to matter, because you don't know if it's funny until you hit the stage. So I would ask the audience to be polite in that way. But then if somebody, like a comedian, would go up, and like, of course, comedians at open mics are going to try new stuff. They're going to try untested material. That's what they're for. And you know what? Sometimes those hit or miss. Like I said, I was looking at my first set the other day, and I listened to it, and there's 2 jokes on there that I would have pulled myself off stage for. Now, I can't believe I said those things, but it was an immaturity, And so I would try to have an unspoken contract between the two. And so if the comedian would come up and try jokes out, but then never say anything funny, and maybe, get defensive with the audience or get upset that they're not laughing about stuff, as the host for an open mic, you can kind of go up there and say something about it, because as people at a show, you don't want to make fun of the other comedians before you, unless it's very notable and crowd appropriate. But like at an open mic, you're there for the audience. So if somebody comes up, there's a couple people here who come up, and it's like they don't make jokes, they don't really know the flow of things. The audience is noticeably uncomfortable. I got to go back up there and do a couple things, and sometimes it's like, hey, self-deprecating comedy, or can you believe what we just all, now we're bonded because we all got through it together, kind of thing. So you just unite the room back up, joke around with them a little bit, show them that we are here to laugh about it, and then bring up the next comedian, and hopefully you hand the baton out. And that's like the key to open mic hosting is keep it moving, make sure you watch your audience, talk about the bar, say, hey, grab a drink, and come on in here. I got 4 or 5 comedians left, and they're all funny. You don't try to throw anybody under the bus. You let them do that to themselves. But if you watch somebody dive under a bus, you got to comment on it to the audience. It's a little different.
Yeah. And I was there nights where you berated the audience, where people would come in and just sit at the bar and, be like, hey, shut the heck up. These guys are on stage, And I think that shows an appreciation of the fact that it's not easy. You got people that get up there, and then for people to just come into a bar and just start talking really loud. I'll tell you, the guy at the Tin Roof, he was great about that. And I think the Bug Jar was nice because it was a separate room, but you've got to be dealing with a lot of those challenges still on a regular basis.
Oh, the Tin Roof, out of all the places that I've ever hosted, was the absolute wildest. And you're right, the guy who ran the place was very, very understanding and helpful about that. Like he didn't allow people to disturb the show, which was nice. Not that the other venues do or anything, but he really didn't stand for it. And it was such a small bar, and like the bar and it was so narrow, and like the stage was like a pallet sized, and that place made for some of the strangest nights because of like how, compact everything was. And people were just loud. They come to a bar, they want to have a drink, they want to talk with their friends. And like, there's like 15 of us there. We're trying to tell jokes into a microphone. And somehow the guy at the end of the bar is louder. What are you going to do? You're going to yell at the guy for being happy at a bar? No, you got to try to, like you said, get him on your side. Be like, hey buddy, what are you laughing about? What's going on back there? And we're having a comedy show up here. You come listen if you want. Start a dialogue just in case that would work. But some of the nights there, we were met with some people who were not interested in being quiet and would purposely try to heckle. And that's when you get into a level of, all right, I'm no longer here for everyone in the audience. I'm just here for the people in the audience who aren't you. And that's you rarely try to roast or say anything to the audience that would get them down or anything, unless it's that kind of show. But at an open mic, you really wouldn't do that. I think it's kind of inappropriate. But hecklers, no quarter. There's no quarter for hecklers. We don't like that.
And hopefully, people that listen to this particular episode, if somebody like me that maybe, at some point goes, their friends go, hey, you should go out to an open mic. And I really think that it's important that they have as much information before they start. And I said, I read books. I had a bit of a sense of what goes on behind the scenes, but the other part, that I always found scary, and I never evolved to the point where I ever did it, was something that they call crowd work, which there were people that I thought were pretty good at it, where they could, have a conversation with the crowd. It was somewhat improvisational. Everything I read said you should default to, hey man, be as structured as possible. I mean, was there a point where maybe you didn't engage in this, quote unquote crowd work? I mean, I know you've interacted with the crowd, but you don't strike me as the kind of guy that would just really go up there with nothing prepared and just be like, hey man, I think I'm just going to try to talk with somebody and hope some gold comes out of it.
Nah, I always have at least like 3 or 4 jokes. I did a show last Saturday, and I got booked for 7 to 10 minutes. So it was just like a quick guest spot. We were in a bar. It was like a bar show. And in the bar had like a horseshoe shaped like bar with like patrons, and then a couple of tables in the back. We were kind of shoved in the corner, like, on like a triangle stage or whatever. And the bar was loud, and I was the first comedian to go up. And I've got a microphone, so I'm not going to just go into like, hey, everybody, let me talk about my kids real quick. Like, that's not going to work. So you kind of have to, at a certain point, have that skill in your pocket. You might not use it every day. You might not use it every day. You might not use it all the time, but you definitely have to have some sort of brush that paints that way, because you've got to be able to interact with your environment. Like, any philosopher will say like, oh, stay present, stay in the moment. And it's important to be mindful of those moments where, hey, I need to get these people, as you said, on my side in order for them to find out how funny I am. Like, I worked hard to write this stuff, but I've got to invite them in. And so at this particular show, like, I start asking people like, hey, anybody know it was comedy here tonight? Are you regulars? Did you think that there was going to be a guy with a microphone talking to you? Or did you just think it was going to be the weirdo in the parking lot talking to you? That was like, it's just something to say. And I can see like, oh, they laughed when I made the connection. They laughed when I repeated the words. Oh, they laughed because of the subject matter of the second thing. And then I know kind of where to start. But like, so I was booked for 7 to 10 minutes, and I probably wrote down 20 minutes. And I just, as soon as I got into something, all my jokes, when they tail off, there's like 3 different ways they could go. I could go into a different direction. Finish a joke about my kids. Well, they didn't laugh about my kids, but that part of the joke was about this also, so I could go into that. Or I could do another kid's joke, or I could say, hey, you guys aren't into that, so let me go elsewhere. And maybe I try crowd work again. But I think it's a necessity at a certain point, if you're going to be in bars or shows or small showcases, you need to be able to, it's not always going to be like, oh, everybody's here to support each other. Like, most of the time, people don't want you to fail. They want to see a good show. They want to see success, but they're not necessarily going to just give that to you, So I think crowd work's really important. You have to be able to bridge that gap and bring them into your world so they understand what you're even trying to do for them.
Yeah, and I mean, again, you showed people that are listening don't see it, but we're on video, and you showed a card of the notes and everything, so that you walk up on stage. And you can't just necessarily just wing it, though. I mean, I think that's the other thing, too, is that, I mean, I'm sure you saw it, and my experience was, too, where you just have guys and gals that would just get up on stage and it'd be like, yeah, let's give it a shot and see how it goes. And it was pretty evident very quickly that it was going to be a difficult night for them and for everybody in the room, for that matter.
Yeah, for sure. I just don't understand. I can't fathom it, of going up there with nothing. And especially at the amateur level, I think that's where the distinction lay, because there's like comedians who are like incredible comedians who can go up and just at any point talk about anything because they just have the experience to do so. But they still got an absolute killer in their pocket. There's something to be said about having the opener, the closer, and anything, whatever you're putting in between. But you should really always know kind of your first joke and your last joke. And by first joke, I mean the first joke the audience is paying attention to, because in some cases you just kind of like gotta, what if you go up to a stage on a holiday? You can't not mention the holiday, So your first joke and your last joke should be known, and everything else you could improv if you're good enough at it. But at an amateur level, people just don't have the cohesion on stage in order to pull that off. At least 1 in 100 do.
So now 6 years in, I mean, that's a significant amount of time. There's an expression, I guess, in comedy and in, I don't know, even maybe in podcasting or whatever, that you get to a point where you find your voice. You've sort of found who you are. You've discovered, that your comic persona. I mean, I never even came close to that. Nor do I even necessarily have a desire to do that. I mean, hopefully the podcast medium is just more comfortable for me. But I mean, I saw that with you. I mean, you must have gotten to a point. You said at the beginning, it was like, I listen back now and I go, this is crazy. So at what point did you really find your voice? And was it the one that you expected to find?
That's a great question, Tom. It really is. That's a really good question. I grew up watching a lot of stand-up. Actually, at age 11, I went to a comedy club in the Poconos with my parents. We went to like a resort thing, and my brother, and my parents, and Louis Anderson was doing stand-up at the place. And my mom loves Louis, but they didn't want to leave us in the room, so we sat in a comedy club at 11 years old and watched Louis Anderson, R.I.P. And he's one of my favorite comedians. And so and then I used to watch the A-List on Comedy Central with my brother growing up, and like all this George Carlin stuff. So I had this really broad spectrum of influence when it came to stand-up comedy. And I'm actually surprised I didn't try it until way later on in life. I've been in a lot of plays and comedy musicals and stuff like that, but I'm surprised I didn't try it till I did. And when I tried it at 29 for the first time, I thought I was going to be like the smart and edgy comedian, not like just go up there and say terrible things. Although I did say some hacky stuff that was just like the jokes that everybody accidentally writes and then they realize they're not that funny. So when I finally realized I really wanted to kind of be true to myself, and my voice was, I'm a dad, I'm not sure, you might have to bleep this out, but I'm a stoner a little bit, but really I'm not really a stoner. I use it for my crippling arthritis. I have like psoriatic arthritis, so there's some element to that too. And I found that just being honest and vulnerable with my audience is who I am. And it's in that vulnerability that I find the humor. I've been through a lot of stuff in my life. Some stuff I don't even talk about on stage because I haven't been able to find the humor in it yet. But there are the darkest moments in my life are what I think finds the humor. So while I try not to do super dirty stuff, sometimes I do kind of some dark humor about stuff that's gone on in my life. And I think that's truly been the most freeing thing about my comedy career, air quotes, because I feel as though I've really come into my own about year 4, and really I honed the voice, right up until the pandemic. Actually, when the pandemic happened, was just starting to get offered like 20, 30-minute spots. I was actually about to open at a theater for a whole weekend here in Rochester. So it was a disappointing thing to kind of cut that momentum off, because I really did find my voice, about a year before that. So I guess 2 years ago. Year 4.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm a dad, so I know you used to this one joke. I don't want to give away the punchline. I mean, I remember it very well. The DMX bike. And,
I don't do that joke anymore because DMX died.
But that's a great joke, and I think what makes that joke work is that anybody that's been a parent or a child or whatever, and we've all been in those different roles. There's a lot of humor in it, but again, it's authentic because I'm sure on some level there was some truth to that interaction between you and your son.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was sometimes you got to work real hard to find what's funny about a bit, but sometimes people just lay them right out for you. Yeah. My son was in the car and I picked him up. It was his birthday the day before. He spent it at his mom's house. I say, hey, bud, I knew what he had. I knew what he got. I said, hey, what'd you get for your birthday this year? And he's like, oh, mom got me a bike. I said, that's cool. What kind of bike? And he said, she got me a DMX bike. And I said, oh, that's too bad. Because, it's hard enough to learn to ride a bike, but now he's going to have to learn to ride or die a bike. But he said, he's like, oh, a DMX bike. And it's like that. You couldn't have set it up any better. Like I couldn't have written that. He wrote it, I will say my kids are a giant inspiration of humor. They're so funny. They're very, very funny kids. I lucked out with these two.
Yeah, and I think the important thing there too is that maybe for other people that think about getting into comedy is that you can joke about people that you love and it doesn't come off as being as offensive. You may, if you go after different groups and whatnot, like, I told a joke that was a transgender joke, and now I look back on it and go, oh man, but nobody ever came up to me and said that it was offensive. And I thought it was kind of pithy. And, but that's, and I have friends that are transgender and everything. So I'm not that guy, but when you talk about your kids, nobody can really accuse you of being mean-spirited, because obviously those kind of jokes are more from the heart in a way.
Oh, they definitely can, though. I had a joke that was, and I still use some of the joke, but the joke is about, it's about like floor is lava, and my daughter jumps into the lava because she says, I want to die. My son's like, hey, don't jump into the lava. If you do that, you're going to die. And she says, I want to die, and jumps onto the rug, writhing around and stuff. And that's the end of the joke now. But early on, I used to do the end of the joke. This is a little dark. I apologize. No swears, but a little dark. And I say, she says, I want to die, and jumps on the rug. And I said, that would have been a pretty tough funeral too, right? Because like I would have had to take, she could have hit her head on the ground, and that would have been a really tough funeral because, one, I'm burying my daughter, but also because people come up to me and say, I'm so sorry. And I said, you didn't know her like I did. She wanted this. And the joke is because she says that before she hit her head. And you should, people who were with me right up until that, and the absolute horror that would come over their face. I know that's a very dark joke. I wouldn't really tell that joke in certain rooms, obviously, but it's, it's just a joke, but it's my kid, but people really still judge me pretty hard for that one.
Yeah, I told a 9/11 joke on the anniversary of 9/11, and that went down like the towers, for lack of a better term. It was just awful. And but again, that's like the whole balancing act between, even now, like I remember seeing a guy doing a whole bunch of political jokes. I feel like 15, 20 years ago, that wasn't that big of a deal, but now it's like, oh my gosh, you never know who the heck you're going to tick off when it comes to any subject. So that's got to be in your mind on some level.
What's funny about politics these days, you can't make fun of your side. You can't make fun of the other side. And I don't mean like, oh, we're so censored. Like, no, I don't think it's like that. I just think it's so serious. There's not really anything. I shouldn't say there's not anything funny to joke about, because there's always something funny about anything. But I personally have trouble finding the humor in a lot of politics, because it seems so negative all the time. I don't know. That's just my problem with it. But I've told some jokes before that some people have come up to me and said, like, early on, and said like, hey, that joke isn't very nice because of this. And it's like, I definitely take feedback. Like, I don't, if somebody was like, oh, you shouldn't say that joke, it's not funny, like, I'm not going to stop doing a joke for that. If it's not funny, I will. But if someone says, hey, that joke is hurtful for these reasons, I'll take that in consideration. I'm not trying to actually make people sad. I know that everybody's got a different type of sense of humor, but I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. I want to make them laugh. Like, the whole point is I want to make them feel better,
Yeah. And a lot of times, like you said, humor comes from a dark place. Robin Williams was obviously dealt with a ton of mental health issues, and it's I think in some ways there's that balancing act where comedy can be a form of therapy for, you've touched on it a little bit, certainly. Okay. Even my podcasting is a form of therapy for me as well. Mm-hmm. And it's letting other people know that, we are all a little bit vulnerable, and we don't, no matter how we come across in public.
I think that to get on the stage and do stand-up, you probably have to fall somewhere into the neurotypical thought process. Like, there has to be some sort of like emotional or psychological damage to your brain in order to want to do that over and over and over again. It can start out being like, oh, this could be fun, what an adventure, but to keep doing it, unless you somehow walked on stage 5 times and all of a sudden you're on the Tonight Show, like, there's going to be, those ups and downs we talked about earlier. It's like, I think you have to be a little messed up to get on the stage over and over again. I know, I'm not going to sit here and talk about that, but I know I got my issues that keep me going back to the stage, and I think you just kind of have to be that way. And I think that's your ability to find the humor. You've got to have gone through struggle to find the humor. What did they say? Who says this? It's comedy is tragedy plus time. Comedy equals tragedy plus time.
I have no idea who said that, but it's a brilliant quote nonetheless.
It is a great quote. And it's a famous quote, but I can't remember who does it. But then there's a bit by a great comedian, Tom Segura, who goes, comedy is tragedy plus time. Oh no, it's Kyle Kinane. My apologies. He goes, comedy is tragedy plus time. But I wrote this school shooting joke, and every time I want to do it, there's another school shooting. So if America could stop doing that, I'm trying to work on some new material.
Yeah, not a great subject at all. So let's wrap up. And I just I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's interesting. A lot of times people they feel like if you're talking to somebody who's a stand-up comedian, it's just going to be a barrage of jokes. But I think it's important too for people to kind of get to know you as a human being, because you're a good dude. You really are. And I think that's part of the battle too. I think you have to. If you're, like you said, it's a community, you have to learn how to maneuver yourself in that community. You got a lot of different personalities, and the only way you're going to be able to succeed, at least on the local and regional level, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if people like you. You can easily be driven out of any community. And I've seen things in message boards and everything of people that have done some pretty despicable things and crossed those lines, and their careers have been destroyed, and who knows, maybe they move to another market. But where do you see yourself? You're 6 years in. I hate to do like a stereotypical, where do you see yourself in 6 years? But
where do I see myself?
Where do you see yourself? But what is really the thing that's driving you in terms of the next thing that you're trying to get to? What level of performance, venue, anything? What is it?
Well, I really feel like, because of the, I don't want to blame anything, but because of the pandemic, I feel like the reset button was really hit on a lot of my drive for certain things. We all had our own things that we went through during that time. But I think it really reset a lot of material as well. So a lot of the material I had built up, as funny as it was, and I can reapply some of it elsewhere. It's like those jokes were for a world that doesn't really exist anymore in that way, we're all wearing masks now, and there's all kinds of other stuff that goes on. So certain jokes just don't fly. So you got to write new stuff, obviously. And my wit is sharper because it's more sharpened over time. But I feel like a reset button has been hit a little bit. And what I think that has kind of shown me as far as goal oriented stuff for the future is I'm just going to kind of keep going along until I find myself in bigger and bigger rooms. I'd like to keep doing that. I'd like to be in the next 6 years. I'd definitely like to be featuring. So that's doing 20 to 30 minutes before a headliner. I'd like to work at I'd really like to be working in showcases more. I'm not sure if I want to start hosting another open mic until things are a little different in the cities. But I think in 6 years, I'd like to be selectively booking regional feature acts. So I'd like to be driving to Philadelphia to do 25, 30 minutes and I think within the next 6 years, I'm going to start, well, at least within the next 3 years, I'm going to start going to New York City a little bit more. I've been there a few times, but I think I need to mix myself into that scene a little bit more. I'm more of an LA guy, I think. I love LA. I go out there a couple times. Doing comedy out there is incredible. But I don't expect to go and make a career of this. I don't think I'd be famous. I just would like to be able to tell jokes, and you don't have to be famous to be able to make a living to do that. And I think if I just stay consistent writing in the next 6 years, I'll definitely be in an advantageous position to keep doing what I love, and maybe it'll provide some more financial support to do so.
Yeah, well, I interviewed a guy named Bruce Wojcik. It's on a previous episode, musician. Same thing. We talked about if you can play to 200 people on a regular basis, you can make yourself a really nice living. You don't have to be guys that are coming in and filling arenas, but
mean,
you know what? I'm sure that your future is going to be bright. As I said, I have a lot of admiration for you. I mean, I don't owe you money, so I don't have to say these nice things.
No,
They really are coming from the heart. And, I'm looking forward to kind of following your career because I think you're on a good trajectory. And you know what? I think there's a lot to be said, like you said, for a person that can make a little bit of money and doing what they like to do, even if it's not their primary vocation. Mm-hmm. But if they can do it as their primary source of income, hey man, more power to you. I mean, really,
honestly.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Anything, any place where people can see you as far as Facebook presence, anything like that you'd like to kind of let people know about as we close up?
Yeah, you can follow my Facebook as comedian Chris Hasenauer, and I'm sure they'll be able to see my name somewhere in the thing. But comedian Chris Hasenauer, it's at HAZ comedy, all one word. And then you can follow me on Twitter, which is at C Chris Hasenauer, like the letter C, Chris Hasenauer. So comedian Chris Hasenauer. And so I'm on Twitter and Facebook are really my big comedy presence there. And there's various links there that'll get you to a video or, this and that to kind of get a little bit of me. I'm going to be in Buffalo on March 4th at Casey's Tavern. I think it's called Casey's Tavern. And I'm going to be doing 10 minutes over there. So it'll be a very exciting storyteller show, a little different than pretty much the same as stand-up, but a little more long form.
Right.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, great. And we'll get some of that stuff in the show notes in case, you can't spell Hasenauer or any of that kind of stuff. But again, thank you. And thank you everybody for listening to the Bagel Logic podcast. This is episode 7 or 8, but we've really enjoyed it. The downloads are up, but if you'd like it, review it, share it, do all that kind of stuff. And we'll keep getting some great guests on. And Chris, I want a commitment from you. Let's do this again we'll do it in a year, and we'll kind of check back in and see how you're doing. So that'll give you something to work towards. You say, the only thing I want is in 1 year to come back on the Bagel Logic podcast with great news.
I'm writing it down right now.
All right, buddy. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. This is your host, Thom Jennings.